talk about is some integrations. And if you take a look at the title slide, you may ask yourself what have these three names in common. And I truly hope you will find out during this talk. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been told I have to introduce myself a second time for the viewers in the live stream. So I'm Marcel Ahrens at Tribe29. I'm working several years with Checkmk. And to start, I want you all to go inside yourself and take a look at your company you're working with or the customers you're working with and think about the following problem. And I guess some of you may know that. When working with monitoring on different tools, you will get to the point that different departments of a company will use different tools for such things like monitoring. And you could go in there and say, yeah, Checkmk is much better, and they will probably be right. But in most cases, it will not work because these people are used to work with their tools and they have no need to change that. So you could either try to convince them further or just work with that. And by working with that, you have some options. You can provide them a way to use direct data of Checkmk directly. You could just duplicate the data and make them accessible for the other department. Or, in the other case, of course, you could also import data. And now we have the story for our three names. And the first one is Grafana. When using Grafana, you have a tool that is summarizing different data sources from all over the IT architecture or infrastructure. It could be databases, it could be another monitoring tool or applications. And by bringing them all together in a summarized visualization, you don't have to care anymore what's the data coming from. And that's the main concept of Grafana, I guess. And for Checkmk, we developed, as Jan spoiled yesterday already, a couple of years, a connector to work with Grafana and to access data in Checkmk Live, because duplicating data is bad, right? And by doing that, we made a lot of experiences and we learned a lot over the last years how this connector is working, what works good, what is not so good, where should we change a little thing and tweak a little. And the main things that we cared about is first, of course, the usability. We learned a lot about that. We cared about the performance that is particularly connected and related to the usability. And as a side effect, we also improved the security of our connector. And of course, since not DataDog, Grafana is this tool, since Grafana changed its API to build plugins to integrate other tools, we wanted to be future-proof and completely rewrote the whole connector to be in this position to maintain that for another several years. And what in the past worked pretty well has been this setup. So we didn't change a lot of things here. It stayed very easy, it's straightforward, and as in maybe other integrations, there are no complicated options. There are no several ways to enter username and secrets and authentication forms and this and that. But just providing the URL, username and secret, that's it. So there's literally nothing more to tell about that. It's so easy. What we changed about here are two things. First of all, we enhanced the security by the given secret. So as in this moment you enter the secret, it's invisible and it's not provided anymore and not seeable anymore for other users or for yourself. So your secret is safe. And the second thing we changed is that you now are able to change the edition you are connecting to. And I will refer to that later on, because this is one thing we needed to do to improve the performance, and I will tell you why later. The second thing that you will do when you set up the Grafana connector is that you obviously try to build a dashboard, and by doing that in a panel, it's called panel in Grafana, you will enter your time series data or some other metrics. And by using that, we optimize that as much as possible. We radically simplified this configuration. Some of you, one question, who used the Grafana connector, the old connector, since now? Okay, that's some people. And you might remember that you have to decide a lot of this, you make a lot of decisions to get finally to your result. You had to decide which site you want to connect to. You had to decide if you want to show a predefined graph or a combined graph or a single metric. And we cleaned that out, all of that, by just making it a filter, like we do in Checkmk. Everything is filtering, and everything is a filter. And there's no distinction between different graph types or different time series types or different sites or anything else. It's just a filter. So you get to your result as fast as possible. So in my case, I enter just a service regex, like you may know from Checkmk, the CPU util, and by doing that, I already get a separated list of metrics or graphs I can distinct from, and just need to choose off my aggregation if I get more than one metric. And of course, you can distinct and choose if you want to display your known metrics, your known predefined graphs from Checkmk, because we already defined what metrics belong together. And you can do that, or you can choose to just display a single metric. And that's it. Of course, when we already did the work, we added some more filter options, like the host labels or in which group a host is, and the host tags. And again, here, the usage is quite the same than it is in Checkmk. So you don't have to learn new things, you don't have to learn new ways of working with Checkmk metrics. And to show that, it's always, I guess, a good example if you have a picture that is moving actually. And so let's see what's happening. And here, I just opened this Checkmk data source. I enter a service regex like I did before, like in this case, CPU load. And you may see that immediately in real time, the metric has been discovered which one you are able to display. So host tags, as I said, look quite the same. And here again, I can enter my pattern and get immediately the result to have my result as fast as possible for an arbitrary amount of hosts or services or metrics. And this leads to my distinction between the performance improvements. The first one is the, where is it? There is it. The usability performance. So it feels more performant now to work with the integration and the connector and to enter your metrics and graphs. But we not only improved the feeling of our connector, we also improved the actual performance, the real performance of this connector. And we did that by the mentioned distinction between the editions. In the old connector, you had not to make that decision, and we, on the other side, had to think about what we can rely on. And it's a difference between the raw edition and the enterprise edition, obviously. And by thinking about what we can rely on, we have to rely on the minimal thing that we can count on. And by distincting between the raw edition and the enterprise edition, you now have to, we don't have to do that anymore. We can say, hey, if you're using the raw edition, we can make these calls, and if you use the enterprise edition, we don't have to fetch all the metrics anymore, like a predefined graph of 4 metrics, fetch all 4 metrics, skip the 3 one, and discard them, and just display the 1. So we improved that by this distinction. The second thing is, and this leads me to my next slide in a second, the second thing is that in the old connector, the connection to the Checkmk server is actually be done from the client. So the client is your browser on your machine, on your laptop, on your desktop, or anywhere else. And this led to that you needed to make two connections, one to the Grafana server and one to the Checkmk server. And if the Checkmk server is somewhere else, there is a bit of delay. So this is a performance improvement, but it's also a security improvement because, like I said, if you need to access the Checkmk directly, there are some implications of that. First of all, you have to be allowed to access the Checkmk server. And second of all, you have to make these mentioned 2 connections. By not doing that anymore, we had 2 things. First of all, the performance improvement I already mentioned. But secondly, the user has to access the Checkmk directly anymore, and we are able now to hide the password, because this password has been sent all over and again to the Checkmk server. It's necessary because the user client made a connection, right? And now the password is never shown to the user, or is never sent it again and again and again, because the Grafana server is making the connection. So if you're now really excited about trying out the new connector, you can do that and visit us on Checkmk on GitHub by taking a look what we've done, taking a look if it's fitting to you, and experimenting with that. You can also download directly the second beta version of this connector. And if you have questions that are not answered in this talk, you obviously can also go to the updated documentation for that connector. So I lied a little bit, because I said duplication of data is always wrong or is wrong. And if that would be true, I had nothing to tell about InfluxDB, because it's about duplicating data. So the truth will be, obviously, that there are reasons why you want to duplicate data. And one reason, there are several reasons actually, but I picked one reason because it's fitting on the slides to show you that. In a bigger company, in a bigger Checkmk infrastructure, you have a lot of monitoring data coming into Checkmk, and Checkmk is computing this data and making some metrics out of this data and stores them in Checkmk, and that's working usually pretty fine. And what also is working usually pretty fine is that users are accessing constantly all these metrics and data. But in some cases, if you have a huge amount of this data, it may be not the best way to do that, because you have 2 workloads, writing and reading, all the time on the same server, on the same data set, on the same file systems. And by just separating them into 2 things, you could distribute your workload into 2 separate things. You'd write it on Checkmk, you distribute it one time to a, for example, time series database, and then make the time series database making the workload for accessing the data constantly to all your users worldwide. And InfluxDB is perfect for doing exactly that, maybe. So why choosing InfluxDB? InfluxDB is the most popular time series database at the moment. So, and we had this connection before with the graphite connection over the Carbon protocol. And what we did is that we enable Checkmk to speak with the new version of InfluxDB. And by doing that, we used common things that you already know from other places in Checkmk. We use connection and rules. I will come to back right after this slide. And we tried and we ensured that we translate the terms and the things, the data structures between Checkmk and InfluxDB to keep the value types actually while sending the data to InfluxDB, keeping a Boolean value true or false and not a string, keeping an int to an int, obviously, and send these converted metrics to InfluxDB, and this time use the retention features and the tenant features of InfluxDB natively. And I know I'm stressing that a little bit, but it's pretty easy. You have the connections in Checkmk, and you can add as many connections as you want. If you have several InfluxDB servers running around the world, you may add all of them in Checkmk. And you may distribute these ones to the individual sites you're using. If you have in the USA your own InfluxDB server and your Checkmk site, you can distribute it to them while managing it, continue to manage it in a central way. And not only that, for each connection, you have an overview. Is this connection actually used? Is it enabled? Did I connect to this InfluxDB server? And more, do I use this connection actually? Am I sending metrics potentially to this InfluxDB server? And the entry point, so the configuration of this connection is fairly simple. You just have to distinguish between your protocol, HTTP, HTTPS. I recommend the second one. Change the default port if necessary, and just enter the host name and the token that you get from the InfluxDB server. It's fairly simple in this case too. And then you need, of course, to decide and tell Checkmk which metric to send to which InfluxDB connection. And we're using the approved concept that we had in the old connector by using rules for that. So you can add your conditions as usual and tell InfluxDB how to send and which metric to send to which connection or to which retention, with which retention time and to which organization. If you're coming from a new connection and you have no rule for that, you get directly to the configuration page of a rule, because obviously you need to add a rule to make that work. If you have already a rule, and you see that in the background in the previous slide, you get an insight of which rule is used for this connection you're coming from. So evaluation like you know that from other parts on Checkmk when you have the context. And the rule itself is structured in a way that you can go from top to down with a guided configuration, choosing the connection, choosing your organization, choosing your bucket, and then telling Checkmk what to do, how to enrich your data with the metric. And we added some metrics similar when looking at the old connector. For example, we added the possibility to send the actual service state as a metric. So you have your service as a metric, and the value of this metric will be 0, 1, or 2, like the OK1 crit in Checkmk, to fetch this data directly and not go over a metric of this service, especially then if this service has no metrics in itself. We added some options and we revised the options to choose from which to send additionally to the original metric, like the state of a host or the downtime, like I said, the Boolean value, the true or false. Is this metric of a service that is currently in downtime or that is acknowledged? And last but not least, we translated the usage of Checkmk using tagging and labeling your services, metrics, and hosts, and to translate that into InfluxDB by sending possibilities like the host name and service name, of course, that's the default, but you also can send the host tags or host labeled service labels to enrich your data and to find your data more easy. I think you know what's coming. If you have problems or if you want to know the exact details, we also added here and updated the article for exporting data and metrics out of Checkmk. And this article is not only about the new connector, which you should use for InfluxDB 2.0, but also for the old connector that is using the Carbon protocol also in this article. Lastly, DataDog. So we talked about how to export data from Checkmk to other tools. And you may have asked yourself already, what's about importing data? Because I'm a Checkmk user, I want to import data and to make it available for me. And we did a lot of things in the last years or in the last versions. For example, in the 2.0, we added the Prometheus importer, the Prometheus data source, to integrate other monitoring tools into Checkmk. And in this version, we are doing that and we are starting that with DataDog. So why importing data into Checkmk? For those of you who have no clue about it yet. So I picked again one common use case. You have a department that is using a specific tool, in this case DataDog, and they're working with them and they're totally fine with that. But some data in this tool is also relevant for your IT operations, for your support, for your admins that are maintaining the servers or other things. And they are used to use Checkmk for monitoring and alerting. They have all the possibilities in Checkmk to process the alerts and make notifications after that to notify the people in a specific way. But these two worlds are distinct. So when the dev team is identifying an issue, there has been no way to transport that to Checkmk. And that's what we are doing now. We are importing the alert that is affecting the IT operations because they are responsible to solve the issue and enable them to use the mentioned all existing complex options and individual options to notify the people. So we actually making these information available to the people who are responsible for that. And by doing that, we treated DataDog as a regular endpoint, as a regular data source with all the options and all the possibilities to control the level of detail for these fetch data, for example. So you can distinct by using DataDog labels to tell them what I am interested in, what's belonging for me, who do I care about. And we started with the basic data, actually, with fetching monitors. Monitors are the alerts in DataDog, or are treated as alerts in Checkmk, and of course the events. And importing events is used or is done by using our event console in Checkmk. So it integrates natively with our tool to use all the options and possibilities in Checkmk, like counting issues, of the same type, or auto-resolving issues if they recover again. And the second thing is the already mentioned monitors, the alerts in DataDog that we are importing and treating as a service to have full control. Do I just want to observe what's happening in DataDog or in this service or in this thing that is monitored? Or do I want to actually alert or notify some colleagues to become actionable? And you will be massively surprised, I guess. There's also a documentation for that, for those of you who are very interested now and like to discover how to integrate it into your Checkmk and how to benefit from the information of the developers that are relevant for you and your team. And now I'm really curious about your questions.